Hey, welcome back. Hope you guys had a great week. Today I'm gonna present to you guys for scary stories from Reddit. If you are new to the channel and don't want to miss any crazy creepypasta stories, hit the subscribe button and turn on the bell notifications. Now with that out of the way, let's start with the stories. My great-great-grandfather was cursed. By OK length 1169. My great-grandmother Maria was quite the force to be reckoned with. She took over the farm in Limpopo, South Africa, after her husband died of a heart attack at the age of 64, and ran it for another 26 years, all by herself. Rumor has it that she had been running the farm from the very beginning, as it was her father's farm after all, and her husband was merely a figurehead to keep the townswomen from gossiping. But they still gossiped about her, for you see, my great-grandmother Maria was seen in those days as a very strange woman. She was fiercely outspoken, intensely skeptical of strangers, and, above all, deeply superstitious. I adored visiting her at the farm when I was younger. My parents would drive us up from Pretoria to visit her each December for Christmas. I admired her greatly, an old woman living and thriving all by herself on a farm in Africa, and as a young girl, I wanted to be exactly like her. I could sit for hours on her lap, listening to her stories, and asking her questions. "Oma Maria, why do you put a ring of salt around my bed each night?" I asked one evening when I was very little. "To keep you safe, my love," she replied sweetly in her coarse voice. "Keep me safe from what, Uma?" "From evil spirits who harm sweet children," she said in a serious yet comforting tone. As I got older, my curiosity and admiration for her grew, and I asked a question that no one had ever given me a clear answer to. "Uma, why did you inherit the family farm if you were both the youngest sibling and a girl?" In our culture, the family farm most often gets passed down to the eldest male child, and if all of the farmer's children are girls, the husband of the eldest sister inherits the farm. "Because, my sweet, I was the only one who still wanted the farm," she said. "My sisters fled to the town as soon as they were old enough to leave home. You see, they were afraid of this place after what had happened to my brother." "I never knew you had a brother," I exclaimed. "Why didn't he inherit the farm?" "Because he died when he was a baby," she said. I was quite taken aback at how bluntly she said this. The way she said it sparked my curiosity even more. "How did it happen, Uma?" I whispered, knowing she would tell me. She always answered my questions, no matter what, but sometimes I wish I had never asked that question because what she told me next haunts me to this day. In 1916, my great-grandmother Maria was 4 years old, living in that same house on that farm in Limpopo with her parents, Hans and Magdalena Erasmus, and her 3 older sisters. Her cousin Petrus, who was 17 at the time, lived there as well and worked as her father's farmhand. Her father needed his help because back in those days, Limpopo was still very much a wild and dangerous place. Jackals, leopards, lions, wild dogs, and other predators still prowled the bush at night back then, and they would gladly feast on the fat cattle, were it not for the hard work of the farmer and his farmhand who would work day and night to patrol the farm and ensure that the perimeter of the fences is always secure. On one dark, moonless night, Hans was on his way back to the farmhouse to call for Petrus, when he heard distressed bellows from his cattle in the distance. With his rifle slung over his shoulder, Hans turned and headed back to investigate the strange commotion. Sneaking up quietly to where the noise came from, Hans could see a figure darting from the distressed cattle and diving into a bush. It was a very dark night, but Hans could see that the figure was much larger than a jackal. It was too small to be a lion, though, and a leopard wouldn't skulk around amongst the nervous cattle with such carelessness. It must be a rogue hyena, Hans thought to himself. A lone hyena could potentially do a lot of damage to a herd of cattle. Although they are not strong enough alone to take down a cow by themselves, they are sometimes known to run around biting each animal, leaving them with broken bones and open wounds that quickly become infected. This would mean that the farmer would have to kill all of those animals to put them out of their misery, which would be a huge financial disaster for the farmer. With this in mind, Hans lifted his rifle and aimed at the spot in the bush where he saw the rustling of the hiding hyena. He fired a single round and heard a thud as something dropped to the ground. He approached the bush tentatively, as the hyena might still be alive and dangerous. Looking into the bush, he could see a dark figure laying there still, with a black pool expanding slowly around it. Hans took a matchbook from his pocket and lit a match to better inspect the creature he had just killed. It was so dark that the flame from the single match illuminated the whole scene. To his horror, Hans looked down to see not a dead hyena, but a boy from the local tribe, probably no older than 13 or 14, still clutching a slingshot. Maria did not tell me what he did with the boy's body. She did not know, and it was a taboo subject to discuss in their house, so she never asked her father about it, and when he died, he took that information with him to his grave. 3 days later, an elder from the local tribe knocked on the door of the farmhouse. Magdalena answered the door and called out to her husband, who was at the lunch table with Petrus. Hans went to the door to ask the man what his business was, although he already has his suspicions as to why the man was there. "Have you seen my son?" asked the stranger, the very question Hans had dreaded. "No, I have not," lied Hans. "What business would he have on my property anyhow?" "He came here to hunt a wild rabbit with his slingshot for our supper," replied the stranger. "I have not seen your son," Hans said sternly. "Now go." He began to close the door when the stranger pushed it back open. "I know that you killed my son," he hissed. "Confess, and I shall spare your family. Deny it, and I shall curse you." "Your son was trying to steal my cattle and was trespassing on my land," roared Hans, infuriated by being threatened. Petrus, having heard the noise, came and stood behind Hans. "It is you who trespass on this land," the man hissed back furiously, his face contorted with anguish. "I curse you, your eldest son will die like a beast at your hand, for it was you who butchered my eldest son as if he were an animal." As he yelled this, he pointed a finger in the direction of Petrus. "Ha! Take your ridiculous curse and go. He is my nephew, I have no sons." Hans laughed at the man. "Not him. Look, there, your eldest son," the man kept pointing, a sneer creeping onto his face. Petrus turned around to see Magdalena standing behind him, her hands protectively shielding her large, pregnant stomach. With that, the strange man's sneer turned into laughter and he began to walk away. Hans slammed the door shut, but the man could still be heard cackling maliciously as he crested the hill that marked the edge of the property. Mere moments after the sound of the stranger's laughter had finally faded, Magdalena gasped and clutched her stomach. She had already brought 3 children into this world and knew what would soon happen. Sure enough, a few hours later at midnight, Magdalena gave birth to her first son with the help of her 2 eldest daughters, 12-year-old Johanna and 9-year-old Sophia, who acted as midwives for their mother. The nearest town is hours away on horseback, but Sophia and Johanna had already delivered many lambs and calves by that time, so they were able to stay quite calm and carefully executed the instructions their mother gave them between labored breaths and suppressed cries. Everything went smoothly, and the next morning as the sun rose, Maria was taken by her father to greet her new brother, who was sleeping contentedly in the arms of his exhausted but otherwise healthy mother. Hans and Magdalena were still privately worried about the words of the stranger. How had he known that a boy was to be born? But soon the man and his curse were almost entirely forgotten and written off as pure coincidence, as the family was too preoccupied with the new baby. A few weeks later, on one sunny afternoon, Maria was sitting in a rocking chair in the kitchen watching her infant brother sleep. She was mesmerized by his little breaths and the beautiful little strands of wispy, golden hair on his round baby head. They had not yet decided on a name for him. Back then, babies only got named after a few months, because infant mortality was still quite prevalent. But this baby was strong and healthy, and Maria was daydreaming of names and listening to the distant sound of her mother singing and hanging laundry, as she started to doze off in the rocking chair. A creaking sound made her eyes flit open, and fear paralyzed her as she saw the strange man from before standing over the sleeping infant, reaching for him. It was only when Maria saw the sunlight glistening off of the knife in his hand that she screamed for her mother. The man swiftly reached into the cradle, grabbing the baby by the head. His knife swiped through the air towards his small head, and then he bolted out of the open back door of the kitchen. Just then Magdalena dashed in through the front door of the house to see Maria crying hysterically and pointing towards the cradle with a trembling hand. Laundry pins scattered everywhere as Magdalena instantly dropped what she was clutching and dove to reach the crying baby. Everyone was relieved to learn that the baby was unharmed, except for the little curl of wispy hair that had been cut from his head. Nevertheless, the family was shaken. Petrus raced off on horseback to the nearest town with money that Hans, who busied himself installing sturdy locks on all of the doors, had given him to buy rifle ammunition. Late that evening, Petrus returned with 3 boxes of ammunition and a pit bull terrier dog that had a white coat and long, hanging teats like a cow. Petrus explained that the dog had been used for breeding, but when her last litter was stunted and stillborn, her master wanted to put her down. Petrus traded his tobacco pipe and a ripe orange for the dog. "I can always whittle a new pipe," explained Petrus, "and I thought that this one would have good maternal instincts to protect the baby." He patted her on the head. With the dog, who became called Usus by the family roaming the yard around the farmhouse, the family started to feel safe again. Usus is the Afrikaans word for big sis. 2 months went by and eventually, Hans and Magdalena felt reassured that their baby was safe again and the strange man would not return. But just as all seemed well again, a whole new slew of troubles would soon befall the Erasmus family. Magdalena started to notice small scratches appearing on her baby's body, and even though she made sure to trim his tiny fingernails regularly, she discovered new marks on his body each morning. The scratches were not the only problem. Insect bites started to appear on the infant's skin as well. This worried Magdalena greatly, as malaria was a common problem in the region. Since his birth, she had taken great care to ensure mosquitoes do not reach him by spanning nets all around the house and gently rubbing insect-repellent herbal ointment on her son's skin each evening. Magdalena also religiously inspected his crib for fleas and other pests, washing his blankets vigorously each time she spotted a new bite, but bafflingly she never found a single trace of fleas. As if the mysterious scratches and bites weren't already causing enough of a headache for the family, a more obvious pest of a larger kind began to rear its ugly head. A colossal male baboon started stalking the farmhouse, wreaking havoc day in and day out by tormenting Usus, stealing vegetables from the garden, and killing chickens. Baboons can be incredibly dangerous. The males have large fangs and are very powerful, and this particular baboon was almost twice the size of Maria. Worst of all was that it was starting to lose its fear of humans. After trying and failing many times to shoot it, Hans finally put his foot down one morning when he found the remains of 3 lambs in the pen next to the house that had been ripped to shreds by the bloodthirsty fiend. That day Hans retrieved a giant pumpkin from the vegetable garden and sawed the top off. He threw jackal poison into the pumpkin, stirring the contents around until the powder and the seeds were sufficiently mixed, and then he left the pumpkin by the gate overnight. He knew that pumpkin was a favorite of his primate foe, and sure enough the next morning the pumpkin was found destroyed with its contents devoured. Hans did not have much of a chance to revel in satisfaction, because that night the baby became horribly ill. He refused to drink milk, there was blood in his soiled diapers, and the poor tiny thing cried constantly for days on end. Hans and Magdalena were so worried about their son that they hardly noticed that the baboon hadn't returned to torment them at all since eating the pumpkin. Just as they had decided it was worth risking the perilous journey on horseback to town to take their son to a physician, the baby started to recover. By that evening he was drinking milk again, had finally stopped crying, and fallen asleep. Hans was overjoyed as he stood stroking the head of his exhausted wife who was sleeping soundly in the rocking chair next to the crib that held his son. He yawned, and stood there a while, basking in the peaceful silence of the house as his family slept. Suddenly Hans heard the dog growling and barking furiously outside, followed by the sound of a loud scuffle. Then Ursus yelped loudly, followed by complete silence. Hans hurried over to the window just in time to see the giant baboon run across the lawn. When it ran through the beam of light past the kitchen window, it looked up at Hans and bared its teeth at him. Its long incisors, each as big as the thumb of a grown man, were covered in blood. Hans rushed outside to find poor Ursus, quivering helplessly on the ground, having suffered a fatal neck wound at the hands of that wretched, terrible baboon. It was clear that the baboon had no fear of them after this latest attack. Without Ursus there to warn them and keep them safe, the family was petrified as another assault on them was almost a certainty, and the next victim could well be one of the children. Hans was at his wits' end with how to deal with this increasingly dangerous animal. A rifle was placed by the back door in preparation for the baboon's next appearance. Hans could think of no other solution except trying again to shoot it. On a rainy day in the autumn of 1916, Magdalena was in the kitchen boiling a pot of water on the stove for tea while her daughter Johanna was in the rocking chair, cradling the baby, with Maria playing on the floor with a straw doll. Magdalena was thinking about a name for her son. He was old enough now and had survived his first serious illness, and she was convinced that he would grow up strong and healthy. She was so lost in thought, and the rain was so loud on the tin roof, that no one had noticed the large male baboon that had entered through the back door until he was standing in the middle of the kitchen, staring at Maria. And had survived his first serious illness, and she was convinced that he would grow up strong and healthy. She was so lost in thought, and the rain was so loud on the tin roof, that no one had noticed the large male baboon that had entered through the back door until he was standing in the middle of the kitchen, staring at Maria. Johanna noticed the baboon first, and carefully nudged her sister with her she. Maria looked up and was confronted by the piercing amber eyes of a dangerous predator. The two girls were frozen in fear, staring at the baboon. When Magdalena finally turned around, her heart nearly stopped at the sight of 3 of her children in the crosshairs of this vicious monster. Afraid that it would attack the children at any moment, Magdalena attempted to distract it by clanging a wooden spoon against the pot on the stove. This worked, and the baboon was distracted for long enough that Johanna could sneak off with Maria and her brother to the safety of a bedroom. The baboon bared its fangs at Magdalena and began to approach her, puffing up its chest and barking threateningly at her. Her eyes moved over to the rifle, but the baboon was between her and it. A sudden idea entered her head. She cautiously moved her hand over to the pot of boiling water and picked it up by the handle. Gripping the handle tightly, she threw the pot at the baboon, showering it in boiling water. Chaos erupted. The creature let out an agonized screech as the pot clambered on the floor, and suddenly the baby was wailing the most terrible, piercing cry from the other room, the kind of cry that could make a mother's heart drop to her stomach. The girls began screaming as well in what sounded like pure terror. Hans and Petrus rushed in through the front door and the baboon sprinted out of the back door at lightning speed, screeching and wailing as it ran for the hills. The men followed it, grabbing the gun as they dashed out through the back door in hot pursuit of their nemesis. Magdalena rushed to the bedroom to find Maria crying while Sophia and Johanna anxiously hovering over their wailing brother, in a state of utter panic. Tears are streaming down their faces as they make way for their mother, who fell down on her knees in shock and horror when she saw her baby, his skin burnt as red as the devil and covered blisters. "What happened?" Magdalena gasped frantically as she tried futilely to comfort her hysterical baby. His skin felt boiling to the touch, and each time she tried to touch him he would scream even harder, drowning out the sound of her daughter's distressed explanations. Then she noticed the steam rising from his red, swollen skin, and the drops of water dripping from him, and suddenly the realization hit her like the stinging bite of an adder. "Sophia, run as fast as you can and stop your father from killing that baboon." Magdalena shouts the order, knowing that Sophia can run the fastest. "Run, quickly, he must not shoot the baboon." Sophia got up and ran out of the room with no hesitation. She had the kind of blind trust in her mother that only a child of 9 can have. She runs out of the back door, following the distant sounds of screeching and men shouting. Dashing across the lawn like an agile gazelle, she leaps onto a crate that her father stores coal in and uses it as a ramp to jump over the garden fence. She scales the wire fence effortlessly, but as she lands on the red dirt on the other side she hears a ripping sound and nearly stumbles. She tugs at the hemline of her skirt, which got caught on the fence, ripping it further to free herself, and then hurriedly ties the skirt into a bundled knot which she tucks into her waistband. Without the restraints of the skirt around her legs, Sophia sprints even faster, adeptly dashing past the thorny shrubs and over the uneven ground of the untamed bushveld beyond the safety of the garden fence. She runs and runs, ignoring the painful stabbing of the sharp rocks under the thin soles of her hand-me-down leather boots. The sounds of screeching and yelling become closer as her chest starts to ache. Finally, she spots her father and cousins standing underneath an ancient jackalberry tree with screeches emanating from somewhere high up in its tall branches. Having nearly exhausted stamina, Sophia comes to a halt about 50 meters from them. She attempts to yell at them to stop, but barely any sound escapes from her as she struggles to catch her breath. She sees her father take aim with his rifle in the direction of the noise, and she takes off again, reaching her hand out to him and yelling, "Papa! Stop! Don't shoot dash!" The deafening shot rang out like a clap of thunder just a split second before Sophia reached her father, grabbing a hold of his shirt and tumbling into him, nearly sending both of them crashing down. When the ringing in her ears subsided, the bushveld was deathly silent, apart from the sound of Petrus muttering "Got the bastard" triumphantly under his breath. Moments later, the body of the baboon fell limply from the tree and landed with a thud on the soft dirt below, showered in a cascade of sticks and leaves. Far off in the direction of the farmhouse, a sudden, heart-wrenching cry of absolute despair echoes through the bush. The two men spin around, deeply worried by the sudden sound, and grabbing Sophia by the hand, they started to hurry back. They could not have ever possibly imagined, as they tread through the shrubs, the sheer horror they would soon encounter, nor the inexhaustible amount of grief that would hang over that house like a cloud for generations to come. _______________________ My great-grandmother Maria passed away in 1999 at the age of 87. Her farmhand found her, at the wheel of her still idling truck which had veered off the dirt road on the farm, having presumably suffered a fatal stroke. My father, her grandson, had inherited the farm but decided to stay in the city as he knew next to nothing about farming. The property fell into disrepair over the years, but I had convinced my father not to sell it. I celebrated my 37th birthday this year and, having grown sick of the ceaseless noise of the city, I decided to relocate with my wife and son to the tranquility of the farm, where I could finally attempt to start my career as a novelist without having to worry about rent, and my wife could create sculptures to her heart's content. We had to do a lot of renovation on the farmhouse, but thankfully the structure was still sound and the well still produced water. The incident that led to me writing this down and posting it here happened yesterday morning, as I was almost finished clearing away the tall, yellow grass at the far end of what was once the farmhouse lawn. 2 graves stood there, swallowed by the wilderness of the bush that had long reclaimed this property. I spent the next few hours clearing the site around the graves. They were nearly identical in design but were evidently placed there at different times, as the one was slightly more damaged than the other. This one read, "Here lies Hans Louis Erasmus, who died at his own hand. May God watch over his soul. 1884 to 1918. The adjacent grave read as follows, "Here lies Magdalena Johanna Erasmus, loving mother and wife. May she finally rest in peace in the arms of the good Lord in heaven. 1887 to 1948. I took a moment to pay my respects to my ancestors, and I laid down wildflowers on each of their graves, before continuing to dig. As I dug into the earth about a meter away from the grave of Magdalena to uproot a small thorn bush, my shovel collided with something hard. Driven by curiosity, I carefully excavated the area to uncover a 3rd gravestone, laying on its back. It was small and cracked, caked in dirt that had settled on it long ago. I scratched away at the dirt to read the following inscription, "Here lies the son of Hans and Magdalena Erasmus, who had fallen victim to the forces of evil that dwell in these wilds before he had been baptized in the name of the Lord. May God have mercy on his soul." 1916 to 1916. There's Something Wrong. By Stunning Size 7842. Hey Reddit, I'm making this post in hopes that I hear something from anyone. There's something wrong. Like I'm talking about, it's been a full day without sunlight, my town is empty and the things in the streets have been screaming louder. I'm sorry, with no context that just sounds crazy. I think I may be getting ahead of myself, let me explain. I noticed something was wrong the moment after I struggled to grab my phone to silence the deafening screams of my alarm. The time on my phone said 6:30, but considering it was still pitch black outside and there was no sounds coming from the usual birds, traffic, etc., there was no possible way it was 6:30 in the morning. It's early August, around here the day is usually started around 5. Knowing I had to be at work in the next 15 minutes, I scrambled to get ready, got dressed, grabbed my lunch and filled the dog's food bowl. Surprised I wasn't being pushed out of the way so somebody could eat, I left the house and hopped in my car at 6:55. Pulling into the shop, the first thing I noticed was the fact there wasn't a single vehicle on the site. I drove around the back of the property and over by the small office behind the building. Still not a single person in sight. I summed it up to missing a meeting or not knowing it was a holiday and went on my way. On the way home I decided to stop at the local grocery store. Being a small rural town in the interior of British Columbia, there had to be at least someone there to have a chat with about the darkness that still hasn't lifted off of the town at now 7:30 in the morning. Making a right-hand turn into the parking lot, I pull the car up to a parking spot and turn the engine off. With a slam of my door, I headed for the entrance and grabbed the handle. Locked. Maybe I have to push, I thought to myself before pushing the handle in. Locked. Starting to get frustrated, I came to the conclusion that I was just going to have to go home and waste the day playing video games. As I turned around to head back to the car, something caused me to stop dead in my tracks. Standing on the driver's side door was a woman with her head down, whimpering to herself. Calmly I asked, "Excuse me ma'am, do you need help with something?" My voice must have scared her, making her jump as if I had shouted in her ear. "Hey, I don't mean to be rude, but you're gonna have to move. If you need some help I can call an ambulance," I said with a stern but non-threatening tone. The woman started to lift her head, revealing what I wish I could erase from my memory. The woman looked like she had been crying for days, her eyes sunken in and leaking a dark, thick substance. Her mouth curled into a hideous, mournful scowl, leaking that horrid slime. I began to step back quickly, causing myself to fall backwards, scrambling away as she continued to step forwards. But I couldn't get away as fast as I would have preferred in that moment. The woman then lunged on top of me while emitting a blood-curdling wail. It sounded like the cry of a mother who just lost their child mixed with that of a beast. Something dark and primordial emanated from within her. I shoved my arm under her chin and shoved back, her jaws snapping at me, hearing her sharp, jagged teeth slam together inches from my face. I began by grabbing her by the shoulder, then throwing her off balance. I then shoved her off of me and ran for the car. Throwing my door open, I forced my way in and started her up. As I put it into drive and was speeding out of the parking lot, the broken, crying woman began to rise and limp towards the vehicle, determined to make me her meal for the day. I sighed and relaxed into the seat, glad that whatever the fuck that was over. With the parking lot in my rear view and the women shrieking getting more faint, I saw them. A handful of silhouettes crouched over a large mass, eating it. No, I didn't stop to check. My mother always taught me that sometimes ignorance is bliss. I managed to get back to my street. I live in a quiet neighborhood, so most of the time it was completely dead. I didn't see anyone for the last little bit, so I think I should be safe. My phone's at 43% and the clock reads 10:07 a.m. The weirdest part in all of this is I still can't find my dog. The only room I have yet to check is the basement, but I can't tell if the whining and slow scratches on the door are from him or a visitor I shouldn't be letting in. My wife and kids are with her family a few towns away. I still haven't heard from her and she's not answering my calls. I've tried calling everyone, but it just goes right to voicemail. I have full bars and my data is working fine. I've tried messaging people and even trying out the godforsaken oldie Omegle, but nobody responds. That brings us to now. It's currently 11:09 p.m. I can hear shuffling and crying coming from outside of the house, and now, I'm writing this to you, yet I don't even know if anyone will even see this. Please, I pray that one of you is able to tell me what is going on. Is everything fine for you? Do you think it's safe to check the basement? What are those things? What ways should I try making contact with people? I need to try to get some sleep now. Those things are starting to scream louder with every hour. I discovered my mom wasn't actually my mom. By derptify_spoof. When I turned 8, 3 days before Christmas, my mom bought me clothes. They are a bit big for a boy my size, but I wore it anyways. My mother was a mid-30 mom. She always told me stories at night. Sometimes she used to tell me that her parents, or my grandparents, won't accept her as family if she didn't show her true self. I didn't understood what that was, but when I asked her about it, "Good night, sweetie," is all she said. I was confused at first, but then after going through the same thing several times, I stopped asking questions. My dad left me when I was 5. My mother hadn't told me the exact reason. I assumed it was because he's working out of town, because I couldn't think of him in another country with a different family. I kept telling myself that he'll be back, he just got some unfinished work. That's all. That thought kept me positive for all these years. One day, on Christmas Eve, Me and my mom was sitting by the brick fireplace on our wall. It was midnight, it was snowing outside. My mom asked me, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" I replied, "I want to be Santa Claus when I grow up." My mom replied with a soft laugh and said, "Well, I hope you will be Santa, Max." I laughed excitedly and my eyes reflected the fire as if the determination was burning in my heart. "It's getting late, you should get to bed," my mom said to me in a soft tone, almost like a whisper. She walked me to my room, pulled up my blanket and kissed me. "Good night, sweetie." This time she didn't tell me a story like all the other times, but I went to bed anyways. I woke up at 2:55 in the morning, with a bladder full of piss. Our bathroom was next to the kitchen, so we'll have to get out of our bedroom if we want to do personal matters. I walked to the bathroom, half sleepy, half awake. Right when I finished, I heard a loud noise inside my mom's bedroom, then a spine-chilling loud crackle came from my mom's room. The sound continued, got louder and louder. I walked near to my mom's door and said out loud, "Mom?" The crackles and the noises stopped. "Mom?" I called her a second time, no response, so I slowly opened my mom's bedroom door. A small creak noise from the door and what I saw froze me. It was a shadow, a very tall one. It has long limbs, a thin stomach and long claws. "Mom?" was all I could say. Under the moonlight, the creature glanced at me. Its eyes had no pupil, it was just pure black. I dropped to the floor and yelled an ugly sound. I cried thinking it was gonna kill me. After half an hour or so, I stopped crying and that creature had disappeared. The moonlight shone so brightly that I saw all my mom's ripped clothes and blood stains all over the white carpet, the bed's blanket left open. I remembered what my mom had said before. She said that whatever happens, go to the police station. I rushed downstairs and outside. With my short legs and the thick layer of snow, I struggled a lot when trying to get to the station. When I got there, they asked me what was going on. I struggled to breathe as they were trying to calm me down. Tears starts rolling down my cheek and I can't feel my legs because of the coldness of the snow. As I was calming down and my breath was slowing down, I described what I saw and heard to the officers. They asked me to take them to my house. I ran to my house with the two officers behind my back. When they got there, they were all terrified of my mom's room. I described the creature to them. That part they didn't quite believe, but they sent me to the precinct for safety, and they rolled yellow and black tapes all over our house, because they thought that this might be a murder scene. 3 police cars were sent there. The siren sound rang all over the neighborhood. At the precinct, they asked me if I have any relatives that I know of and asked for their phone number. I told them about my uncle. They called him, describing what happened, and he arrived more than an hour later to pick me up. I slept at my uncle's that night. Next morning, my uncle sat on the couch in the living room and was watching the news. I sat there with him. Since I couldn't sleep much, I woke up early. He was watching the news with him so I could clear my head of that creature. Breaking news: in London, a deformed body was found. The victim's skin was nowhere to be found and the victim's guts and brain disappeared. The victim was identified as Michael Solomon. My uncle and I were terrified, knowing that my dad was murdered in such horrible way. The reporter gave a detail that caught my attention. The members of the victim's family described the murderer as tall, long limbs, thin stomach and long claws. The murderer was still nowhere to be found and still on the loose. Stay tuned for more informations. Family Slaughter Plan by Hunter for LKVE. So one night I was sleeping, it was 4 a.m., and I got a call from my cousin. He was whispering, "Help me, they found me." And I said, "Who's after you?" and he said dangerous men. So I said where his location was. He sent it, and then the phone call ended. I thought he hung up so I can come. I went, but it was empty. I tried calling my cousin, but he wouldn't answer, so I called the police. After 10 minutes they arrived. I told them what happened. They said this is not proof of an actual emergency, and they left. After that I was destined to go there, but my girlfriend stopped me, and wouldn't let me go. She said it's too dangerous. When we slept again, I snuck out and went to my friend's house for the night. I told him what happened and he didn't respond and went to bed. I asked him if he heard me and he didn't answer. I thought that was weird. So when he fell asleep I took his phone and tried to open it. It needed a passcode, but it's also Face ID, so I put it in front of his face with very low brightness, hoping he wouldn't wake up, and it worked. I immediately went on the phone and checked if there was anything unusual. I went to messages and found a contact. Who I'm gonna call George. George sent him a picture of something. I was terrified of the pictures he sent. He sent pictures of dead bodies and a lot of blood, so I was terrified when I saw a photo of my cousin's limbs torn up. I was shocked. I took the phone and put it in my backpack. I told my friend I need to go to the bathroom, so I went to the bathroom. I saw a window. I opened it and snuck out. As I was on the roof and it wasn't very far from the ground, I jumped and ran away, but I couldn't go back home. So I called the police and turned the phone in as evidence, and then when I returned home, my girlfriend wasn't there. I was confused because she didn't call me while I was gone, and now she's missing at 5 a.m., so I called her. She didn't answer, and after that I found a pool of blood under the pillow. I got scared and thought she was kidnapped. I called the cops once again, and it eventually got on the news. My girlfriend returned home angry and asked why I left the house. I didn't say anything to her. She got mad and told me to get out of the house, so I did. I went to my mom's house and I noticed she was shocked too, so I asked her what's wrong. She didn't answer. I got mad and took her phone while she was in the shower and checked her contacts. I saw her being in contact with my father-in-law. I saw the messages and I was shocked. I found the exact same images on my friend's phone, and then when she got out the shower, I questioned her. She didn't answer but then asked if I really want to know, and I said yes. She told me my girlfriend's father, aka father-in-law, was a part of a drug cartel, and my girlfriend was actually evil and wanted to kill all my family members. It'd have started with my cousin and they would have continued. I asked my mom how she knew about all of this, and she said my father-in-law threatened her to be a part of it, otherwise she would be a victim. I called the cops and my mom gave them their location and got them arrested, including my girlfriend. I was relieved that was over, and I'm still traumatized about it, but now that I'm telling someone it feels much better. Have a nice day. That was all for today. Glad you guys listened till the end. Don't forget to like the video and share with your friends. Also send in your own scary stories at horroxperiencemedia@gmail.com so your work can get featured in my videos. You can find a link in the description. Subscribe for more similar stories and see you guys in the next video.